You might be shocked to learn the real details about Jesus' appearance and life. This might completely change how you imagine Jesus. Have you ever wondered what Jesus looked like? Not just in appearance, but in the presence and aura that left even his adversaries in awe. Some might say his look doesn't matter, and I agree, but what if there's more to it? Pontius Pilate, the man who oversaw Jesus' trial and crucifixion, wrote a letter to Emperor Tiberius that takes the description of Jesus to an entirely new level. A letter so extraordinary it's not included in the Gospels, yet it paints a picture of Jesus' miracles, teachings, and even the events surrounding his resurrection. What did Pilate, a Roman governor with no stake in Jesus' divinity, say about him? How did Jesus leave such an impression on someone who held his fate in his hands? This letter doesn't just touch on Jesus' appearance, it reveals his undeniable impact, his miracles, and the unmatched presence that even Pilate couldn't ignore. Today we're diving deep into this fascinating letter, uncovering a side of Jesus you may have never considered before. This isn't just another story. It's an account that brings the life of Christ into vivid detail, one that makes you stop and think. If you're curious about the words of someone who witnessed Jesus firsthand, stay tuned. This is a discovery you don't want to miss. And since our channel is all about the life of Christ, make sure to subscribe now for more eye-opening insights that will deepen your understanding and faith. Let's uncover this together.
Emperor Tiberius, I write to you from Judea, a land that has brought me nothing but unrest and turmoil since I arrived. My days here have been filled with strange events that disturb my peace, and I fear may even reach the empire's ears in time. It feels as though the gods themselves have turned their backs on me. This city, Jerusalem, is like no other, a place of constant tension and rebellion. Its people seem always ready to rise up at the slightest provocation. From the very beginning, I met resistance from their leaders. I tried to build a bridge of goodwill, hosting a banquet and inviting their high priest and elders. None came. Later, the high priest visited, but his reason for refusing my invitation was flimsy. He claimed his religion would not allow him to dine with Romans. I knew it was more than faith keeping him away. There was a deeper disdain for us, for me. Their mistrust was obvious, and I soon realized these priests and leaders are clever, willing to betray Rome if it served their ambitions. I must tell you, Emperor, Jerusalem is the most difficult city I have ever governed. During my time here, I began hearing whispers about a man from Galilee, Jesus of Nazareth. People said he was teaching new ideas and gathering followers. Naturally, I was suspicious. I thought he might be inciting rebellion against Rome. But I observed him closely, and to my surprise, he was no revolutionary. Instead, he spoke words that calmed the people, telling them to give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. His wisdom left me astonished. Here was a man who posed no threat to our rule, yet he had a way of moving the hearts of the masses. My curiosity grew, and one day I saw a great crowd around a young man who seemed different. I kept my distance, but sent my secretary, Manlius, to listen. When Manlius returned, he told me he had never heard anyone speak with such wisdom and gentleness. One moment stood out. A man asked Jesus if it was right to pay taxes to Caesar. His answer was simple but profound. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. That reply struck me deeply. I decided then not to interfere with him. He was no troublemaker, and in my heart I felt he was a man of peace, not a threat to Rome. But my decision to leave him angered the religious leaders. They despised him, calling him dangerous and accusing him of blasphemy. Day after day, complaints about him poured into my court. They said he insulted them, calling them serpents, and likening them to tombs beautiful on the outside, but filled with death inside. I could see their pride was wounded. Jesus taught humility and rebuked their arrogance, and they hated him for it. I grew tired of their constant demands to silence him. Instead of giving in, I sent for Jesus, inviting him to my palace. When he came, I was struck by his presence. He wasn't like any man I'd ever met. There was a calm, powerful stillness about him, as if he carried an otherworldly peace. I found myself unable to speak at first, humbled by the man standing before me. He seemed to be saying without words, "I am here." With my voice trembling, I addressed him. I told him I admired his teachings, comparing his wisdom to that of Socrates and Plato, though I felt it surpassed even theirs. I warned him that his words had angered many, including powerful men who were plotting against him. I urged him to be more cautious, to consider the consequences of his actions. I feared for his safety, knowing how easily a crowd could be stirred into violence. He listened silently, and then replied with words I did not fully understand. "Ruler of the earth, your words do not come from true wisdom. Only God knows where the waters flow." Then he added something that unsettled me deeply. "The blood of the righteous will be shed." There was something final in his tone, as if he had already accepted his fate. I tried to reassure him, promising to protect him from harm, but he only smiled faintly and said, "When the time comes, there will be no refuge for the Son of Man. My refuge is in heaven." His words weighed heavily on me. I felt powerless, as though events were moving beyond my control. Despite my efforts to keep the peace, tensions in the city continued to rise. The religious leaders grew more determined to destroy him. As the Passover approached, the city filled with pilgrims, and the leaders saw their chance. They stirred up the people, spreading rumors and using the temple treasury to bribe others to turn against him. They accused him of blasphemy, claiming he had prophesied the temple's destruction and declared himself the Son of God, the King of the Jews. Soon the cries of "Crucify him" began to echo through the city streets. It was as if the entire city had turned against him. I tried reasoning with the crowd, telling them that Jesus had committed no crime against Rome. But they refused to listen. The mob grew louder, and I found myself trapped between my duty to protect an innocent man and the need to prevent a riot. Hoping to appease them, I offered to release a prisoner, as was customary during the festival. I thought they would choose Jesus, but instead they demanded Barabbas, a known criminal. I was desperate to calm the chaos, so I ordered Jesus to be flogged, thinking that would satisfy their anger. But it only seemed to fuel their hatred. They shouted louder, demanding his crucifixion. I could see the situation spiraling out of control. My heart was heavy with guilt and fear. Finally, I called for a basin of water, and in front of the crowd washed my hands, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood." I declared that his death was their responsibility, not mine. Yet, deep down, I knew I could not escape the weight of what was happening. As Jesus was led away to be crucified, I stood watching in silence. He walked with a quiet strength, his face calm despite the chaos around him. The city seemed darker, the sky heavy with an unnatural gloom. It was like the gods themselves were mourning. I felt an unshakable sense of dread, as if I were witnessing something far beyond human understanding. When Jesus reached the place of execution, the crowd followed, leaving the city eerily empty. I stayed behind, watching from a distance as the sky grew even darker, black clouds gathering over the temple and the city. Then the earth shook violently, an earthquake unlike anything I had ever experienced. The people who had been shouting for his death moments earlier now looked terrified. Some began to flee, while others stood frozen, staring at the sky. I heard whispers of miracles, of strange signs in the heavens. It was as though all of creation was grieving. As the execution continued, I remained in the distance, watching the scene unfold with a heavy heart. Jesus hung on the cross, his body battered and broken, yet he did not cry out in anger or despair. Instead, I heard that he spoke words of forgiveness. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Those words struck me deeply. Here was a man who, in his final moments, showed mercy to those who had condemned him. It was unlike anything I had ever witnessed. The city seemed to hold its breath as Jesus took his final breaths. The crowd, once filled with anger, now grew silent. A strange stillness fell over Jerusalem, broken only by the whispers of those who began to regret what had been done. Many who had demanded his death now looked uncertain, even sorrowful. I could see the weight of their actions beginning to settle on them. Even my own soldiers, hardened men accustomed to violence, appeared shaken. Some passed by me in silence, their faces pale with unease. When Jesus finally died, the sky seemed to darken even more, and the earth trembled once again. It was as if heaven and earth were mourning his death. The cries of the crowd had vanished, replaced by an eerie quiet. I heard people murmuring about the temple curtain being torn in two, an event that seemed to hold some great significance for the Jews. Others spoke of an unnatural darkness and the earthquake as signs of divine anger or sorrow. I could feel it too. This was no ordinary execution. Something extraordinary had happened. As night fell, I wrapped myself in my cloak and walked through the silent streets of Jerusalem. The air was thick with sorrow and regret. I saw groups of people standing in the shadows, looking back toward Mount Calvary, as if waiting for something. The city felt different, as though it had been forever changed. Even I, a Roman governor hardened by years of service, could not shake the feeling that I had played a part in something far greater than myself. When I returned to the palace, I found Joseph of Arimathea waiting for me. He was an elderly man, humble yet resolute, asking for permission to bury Jesus' body. I granted his request, sensing that this was the least I could do. Joseph left to make the arrangements, and I was left alone with my thoughts. The blood of the Nazarene still stained the palace steps, a haunting reminder of the day's events. Not long after, the city was stirred once more. News spread that Jesus' tomb had been found empty. His disciples were claiming that he had risen from the dead, just as he had foretold. I immediately investigated, speaking to Marcus, the captain of the guard who had stationed soldiers at the tomb to prevent any disturbances. Marcus reported that something unexplainable had happened. The guards spoke of a great light that had appeared at the tomb, accompanied by what they described as heavenly music. One guard, Ben Isham, told me he had seen figures in white and heard melodies that seemed to fill the sky. Ben swore it was no ordinary event. He said the light grew so bright that it overwhelmed them, and the ground shook beneath their feet. The guards fell as if struck by an unseen force. Later, the priests tried to silence them, offering money to spread a story that Jesus' disciples had stolen the body. But Ben refused, insisting that he had seen something miraculous. Even some of the priests privately admitted that Jesus was unlike any other man, speculating that he might have been sent by heaven for a divine purpose. I must confess, Emperor, that I too am haunted by this thought. Jesus of Nazareth was no ordinary man. He carried himself with a dignity and wisdom that I have never seen before. His presence was powerful yet gentle, commanding respect without ever demanding it. His words were unlike anything I have ever heard, filled with a truth that seemed to come from beyond this world. Even now I can recall his appearance vividly. Jesus was of average height, with hair that fell softly over his shoulders. It was light brown, almost golden in the sunlight, and his eyes were extraordinary, sometimes appearing light brown, other times blue. His gaze was piercing, as though he could see directly into the depths of a person's soul, yet it carried a kindness that was disarming. His face showed both strength and gentleness, a combination that I have never seen in another man. His skin was fair, his appearance simple yet dignified, as if untouched by the harshness of the world. After his death and the strange events that followed, I found myself reflecting deeply on all that had occurred. I, who have governed over rebellions and riots, have never felt such sorrow and awe as I did in the presence of this man. Even now I cannot shake the sense that he was not of this world. Some say he was the Son of God, and though I am a Roman, I cannot dismiss the thought. His life, his death, and what followed seem to point to a truth that is beyond human understanding. Emperor, I have shared with you all that I know of Jesus of Nazareth. I do not claim to understand the full significance of what has happened, but I am certain that his story is not over. This man, whose teachings and character left an indelible mark on Judea, will continue to influence lives long after my time here has ended. I write this with a strange mix of regret and reverence, for I feel I have witnessed something that will change the world forever. I leave you with this final thought. Jesus was unlike any man I have ever met. His wisdom, kindness, and unshakable peace set him apart from all others. Though I washed my hands of his blood, I cannot cleanse my heart of the weight of that day. If he was indeed sent by the gods, or by the God of the Jews, then his purpose was beyond my power to stop or comprehend. Perhaps the heavens themselves ordained his fate, and I, unwittingly, played a part in it. I remain your loyal servant, Pontius Pilate.